At the time, over 25 grams was a death sentence. Were you not nervous about that? Today, let me take you back to the 1970s, where a daring Canadian named Alex found himself entangled in a heart-pounding heroin smuggling operation at Bangkok's Don Muang Airport.
And I saw three armed soldiers on both sides of the car, ready to shoot.
Join us as we uncover Alex's journey from smuggling hashish out of Morocco and India back to Canada. We're going to get into how Alex got locked up abroad in Arthur Road Jail, a notorious prison in Mumbai, India. And then we're going to get into how Alex was smuggling heroin out of Thailand. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you on the show here. Let's go all the way back to your early life. Tell everybody where you're from and what was life like growing up for you.
I was born in Toronto, Canada in 1950 to a Scottish father and an Irish mother. Life was, I guess, pretty normal as what one would think, going to school and growing up. And I found we were moving every year or so, and I wasn't really able to make long-term friends at schools. I was an only child, so I spent a lot of time with myself and a lot of time discovering, reading. A little later, I realized that there was an alcohol abuse problem in my family and that my mother and myself were the people being abused. I thought it was kind of natural for every kid at that time. When he went home, the father usually gave him the boot or a couple of smacks and maybe did the same to his wife. It wasn't until years later I was sitting with a number of friends and I said, I'm lucky, I was never beaten or abused physically when I was a kid. And I went home and I said, you just told a lie. And it dawned on me. I had repressed this for 15, 20 years. Trauma you tend to put away, you block, you don't want to think about, or you take something to try and escape it. I started working at 11, selling newspapers on the weekend. At 13, after school, I worked in a store similar to a 7-Eleven. I knew that if I had money, I could leave home. When I was 13, I pinned countries on a map of the world that I had on my wall. And I probably pinned the countries that were the hardest for me to pronounce. Afghanistan, Thailand, Laos were just some of them. And years later, I moved out at 17 on my own. At 19, I was in Morocco, and at 20 in India. Years later, I returned to Canada at 29, and I would have paid $1,000, Pete, if you could have given me the map that I had put the colored pins on the countries of the world when I was 12 or 13 years old, to see if, in fact, how many of those countries did I visit later in my life.
Let's talk about your traveling days. You got involved in smuggling drugs from hashish from Morocco to Canada back when you were early 20s.
Yeah, 19 was my first trip away outside of Canada to a foreign country. Canada didn't grow marijuana at this time. Our marijuana came to Canada from Mexico. So there was a market for hashish. We smoked hashish in Canada in the 70s. In the 70s, drugs were sociably acceptable, much like they were in England in the 18th century for quite some time. If you were addicted to opium or cocaine, an upper class person, it was all very good and very fine. So my first attempt, I put some hashish in some newspaper rolls, sent them by sea mail, and they arrived 3 months later in Canada.
No problem, no issue.
No problem, no issue.
And then how were you getting this hashish in Morocco? How were you finding it?
I met a young fella in Tangiers. Now, we had been up to Katama, the mountain that's very famous in Morocco for growing and selling hashish. There's a little note about it in my book. And we were going to spend the night in a hotel. We'd been in the hotel 10 minutes. There was a knock on the door. The police dragged us out, put us in our car, made us drive to a garage with a hole in the ground, and started searching the car, assuming that we, in fact, had hashish with us. No, we didn't. But later I met a young man in Tangiers, and he wanted to sell me hashish, and he was very helpful as to supplying what I needed to do what I did.
And were you making good money off this?
Well, this was my first attempt. I guess it was as much to see if I could do it or not. But yes, and years later, similar from India, a kilo of hash might cost you $100 or $150, and that would sell for $2,000. So,
and you just put it in an envelope and just post it, and it will arrive.
In the early 70s in India, we used the Bombay horticultural stamp. And so they were envelopes. They were cloth reinforced envelopes with about 350 grams of hashish inside. It smelt very bad, so it was wrapped in a thick clear tape to try and keep the smell in. And it looked like you were receiving a catalog from the Bombay Horticultural Society. So these all went out by a franking machine at the post office. A franking machine is the weight amount, how much is the price, as opposed to individually stamping the packages or the envelopes.
So let's move. So you moved from then Morocco to India. Is that right?
Yeah, I went back to Canada for a year. I was in Morocco. I didn't have enough money to go to India and live there. So I went back to Canada and worked for a year, and then at 20 went to India. Yeah, a number of people had visited India and had come back, and there was something different about them that intrigued me. So I wanted to visit India.
So when you got to India, it was heroin from India, or was it hashish?
No, it was hashish from India. India's famous for its hashish. And I mean, I didn't go. Nobody plans to be a drug smuggler, Pete. Nobody ever thinks, oh, I'm going to get up tomorrow and start smuggling drugs. It was the age, and we didn't really think we were doing anything wrong. We knew it was illegal, but it was fashionable.
In the 70s, it would have been a kind of the hippie scene in India, I'd imagine.
Everywhere, exactly. Pretty well everywhere in the world, yes, and in India also.
And where were you? Were you in Goa?
Yes, I had a house in Goa from 71 through 79.
Okay, and tell us about your lifestyle in India at the time.
Well, I guess I started off on the wrong foot. I hadn't been there very long, and I was with a gentleman who was at the airport sending a girl out of the country, and I was kind of naive. She was arrested at the airport. We were all taken back to our hotels. I was arrested with 10 kilos of hashish and detained, interrogated for about 2 weeks, every day to police headquarters in a black ambassador from the lockup, and eventually put in Arthur Road Prison, taken to court every 2 weeks, kind of waiting for a trial as such. Spent nearly 3 months in jail, paid a fine. There were 3 of us, and it was about $1,500, and we were all released.
Wow, you just breezed through that like you go for a walk in the park. So you went to prison in India. What was the prison like in there?
Well, at the time, it was very, very good. As foreigners, we were given a very large cell. There were 2 of us, 2 gentlemen. There was a lady with us, and she was housed separately. I never saw Anne the entire time that we were there. We had a very large room or very large cell. Hashish was available. The other gentleman that I was with caused a lot of problems, and the warder, in fact, used to give me hashish and tell me, give it to your friend, tell him to smoke it, and tell him to stop yelling and screaming and causing problems. So life was good in that respect. We didn't really have any worries. We had no fears. I've read a lot of stories about Arthur Road Prison since the 70s that are not good.
So you only had to pay a fine, and you were released then after 3 months.
That's correct. Our lawyer had told us, if you want to get out quickly, they'll settle now. You'll have to pay a little more money. Then they'll think you have more money, and they'll think you are more involved. So just let it take its course, and it'll end fairly quickly, and you won't pay very much money. So we listened to our lawyer.
For 3 months for 10 kilos of hash is quite lenient, isn't it?
Yeah, and this was, as I say, just kind of waiting trial. And a second time at my house in Cove, 7 kilos, I paid $150 fine. Much the same. Well, in Canada, I'd have done a little more, but yes. And at that time, we didn't need visas for India. Commonwealth citizens from England, let's say from Ireland, from Canada and Australia, we could go and live in India for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years without any visa whatsoever.
Is it the same system as well? You were sending it by post, yeah?
By post, and we sent trunks also. We made false bottom trunks, and some people used runners, couriers. I really didn't like to do that because you were putting someone's freedom in jeopardy if they were arrested or something went wrong.
And so you knew people that were using couriers then?
Oh, yes.
And what would they swallow it, or would they strap it to them? Or
oh, no, 7 kilos in false bottom of a suitcase.
And what was the success rate back in the 70s of getting from, say, India to Canada carrying drugs?
Success rate worldwide was good. There were no dogs. There were no x-ray machines. There were no suspicions that you were carrying drugs. If you had very long hair and looked like you hadn't bathed in a day or two, they may, in fact, pull you over and ask to have a look at your luggage and things like that. But as a rule, no, it wasn't on the radar.
And where does heroin come into all of this? Was it like, because I read in the book that you were using heroin at the time in India as well.
Well, I'd used heroin once or twice recreationally in Canada as a teenager, and I could take it or leave it. I never took it very seriously. And actually in India, on first arriving the first year or two, I visited an opium den in Mumbai on Sukalaji Street fairly regularly. And I'd read some books when I was younger about Thomas de Quincey and an opium eater and how people viewed the world differently after they'd done something like this. So I kind of wanted to experience everything, really. Not knowing it later in life, maybe I would in fact write about it.
How about your friends? So you used to snort it, but your friends, they injected it, and you mentioned a lot of them passed away.
Yeah, a lot of people prefer to inject heroin. They think that they're using less and getting a bigger kick. In fact, friends used to say that to me as I watched their tablespoons overflowing on the floor before they even added water and put it into the syringe. So I thought, no, I have a better plan for me than that. So for years, I wouldn't admit I was a junkie because I didn't inject, but I was. Unfortunately, and I was afraid to talk about it. You know, you get out of jail, the last thing you think about is, I'm going to write about I was a drug smuggler. Oh, no, that's bad. People are going to hate you. You're going to get negative comments. Maybe someone can learn something from it.
Let's talk about Don Muang Airport. You were smuggling 4 kilograms of heroin out of Don Muang Airport every 3 months. Tell us about that. How are you doing that?
Well, we had a few different methods. Cigarette cartons will hold 250 grams, a quarter kilo. 3 or 4 cigarette cartons were okay at the time. Nobody said, look, you're only allowed 1 or 2 cartons of cigarettes. I found these Chinese cookie tins that were all nicely sealed in plastic. If you removed the cookies, sealed them back up, they looked like they just came from the factory. Depending on the time of year, they may have been wrapped in gift wrap if it was Christmas time, or if it was Eid, or if it was Diwali, going back to India. And we never had any problem at the time.
Really sorry for interrupting the video here, folks, but I have to keep the lights on here at Thairish Times. So let me tell you about my experience with online dating. For the most part, folks, it has been a positive experience, but I have had a few disastrous dates. One in particular was when the person that showed up to meet me wasn't the same person I was chatting to online. But it all ended up working out for me because I ended up meeting my wife Noon online. So I've recently been working with an online dating service called Christian Filipina, and what they do is they help Western men meet Asian women for long-term serious relationships. So Christian Filipina, they're big on security, and they have a digital team monitoring the website at all times to make sure everything is above board and people are who they say they are. So the same thing that happened to me won't happen to you. And I actually know a few men who married Filipino women, and they described them as being loyal, caring and supportive partners. Isn't that just exactly what you'd want in a partner? That's what I'd want in a partner. So if you're interested in what I just said, check out the link down below for Christian Filipina, and check out the pinned comment section as well. And best of luck in finding your potential life partner. And now back to the video.
Was there ever any close shaves where the police asked to see anything, or did you just skip through every time?
Well, I was at airports twice, going through immigration or customs, when people who knew me, and I always used my middle name when I grew up, Alex or Alexander. I only started using later. And two different occasions, people called, "Hey, Donnie, how are you? What are you doing?" And my passport said something other than Donnie. And I just had to deflect and say, "Wrong guy." Once leaving supplier's house in Chiang Mai in his car with half a dozen kilos of heroin, he had his revolver down his back. I knew if we had any problem, it might be the end. All of a sudden, he started slowing the car down and down and down to about 3 kilometers an hour. And I saw 3 armed soldiers on both sides of the car, ready to shoot. I saw my life flash in front of me. And he just continued driving at 3 kilometers an hour until we passed.
That was just like a checkpoint.
That was a checkpoint, or whether they knew him, whether they knew he'd be passing with a couple of foreigners in the car, or, I mean, if they looked in good enough, they could see the bags of it right there. When you bought it from the factory, it was very large. It wasn't compressed at that time. Today, they use machines to compress it into bricks. Then it came out of the vacuum like a bromo seltzer, a very kind of a large, fluffy ball, we'll call it. So a kilo would fill one of those shopping bags that your mother used to buy at her favorite department store in Ireland before she went into shop. Those big brown paper bags. A kilo would fill that. They came in 350-gram bags, 3 to a kilo. The 50 grams was extra weight for the bags. People even wanted to buy the empty used bags that said Red Lion brand or WO Globe brand.
But when you say factories, were you getting this from?
Pretty close. Pretty close.
And they had their own branding on it and everything?
Oh, yeah. Well, still today, you still see Red Lion. I saw a bus recently in the Thai news, and I think it was Red Lion. Oh, yeah. I didn't want to get too close.
And I mean, at the time, over 25 grams was a death sentence. And were you not nervous about that?
You don't think of that. You know, that's, I know it sounds foolish. And that's where I kind of made my money, because everybody came to India. They were afraid to come to Thailand.
And you were taking it from Thailand to India?
To India, not anywhere else initially.
And the hippies were using it in India?
Well, no, I dealt with people who came from Europe just to buy. They stayed a week or two in Mumbai and left.
And they take it back to Europe?
Yeah, I did not deal to users. Oh, no, I didn't deal to people who used the drug as such, right? Unless you took it back to Europe and you happened to do a little. No, I didn't deal grams. I didn't deal on a street level at all. No, I couldn't afford to do that.
And what were these characters like that you were dealing with? I mean, were you dealing with the mafia, or what were these people like?
No, they're guys like you and some of the people you've met on your travels, Pete, that knew they could make a buck and knew that there was demand in their country. Some of them may have had a bit of a habit on, and that may have been their reason or their excuse, but primarily financial. They could spend $2,500 in Bombay and turn it into $25,000 when they got home. So
you must know people that got caught.
Oh, yes, I do. In fact, I did myself. Yes, I know people who got caught, more so with hashish.
So you got caught in Mumbai, and where else did you get caught?
In 1979, I returned to Canada, and I'd been wanted for a long time. I had gone through a number of passports that I had to create myself. And I was arrested and sentenced to 4.5 years in a federal penitentiary for 100 grams of 96% pure heroin.
And that you got caught with that when you landed in Canada?
No. I never carried. I was set up once I was in Canada. I went to visit a fella, and I guess he'd been arrested and had given the police my name and set up a meeting with me for them to come in and take me down.
So what was that? What was like doing time in Canada like?
Well, doing time was pretty good. I actually became chairman of the inmate committee in Warkworth Penitentiary. I got a TV. You worked all day. In Canadian penitentiaries, you make goods that are sold to the federal government. So you work for $5 a day, and they sell the sofas and the chairs and whatever else that's made to government offices. I had no problems whatsoever. I got respect from the inmates. I sat down once a week with the warden and aired the complaints of the inmates. I didn't have anybody ever come after me. People involved in drugs tend to get a little respect inside because inmates know maybe you can supply them with drugs.
And at this stage, were you using heroin at all during this period?
Yeah, actually, when I was sentenced, the judge said, I'd grant you bail, but I'm afraid to because I think you'd go out and buy heroin. Well, I actually had 20 grams in my mouth when I was arrested that I still had some of, while I was going to court on a regular basis. So I couldn't pull it out and say, no, Your Honor, I don't need to go and buy any. I have it right here. But what he said to me, you've also been charged with impersonation. And it doesn't matter whether you impersonate your mother, a policeman, or your best friend. The sentence is 14 years. The next time you're in my court, I'll see that you get it. So I was never sentenced on having a false passport or
and why were you creating these false passports? Was just to travel?
Okay. The police in Canada had been on my case longer than I realized, and there was news about us in Canada that I didn't know, in fact, in India. So they repeatedly sent the police to visit me in Culva Beach, and there was really nothing for the police to find once they found 7 kilos of hashish. But on one occasion, they sent police who wouldn't take anything for an answer, but take us to headquarters in Panjim. They had direct orders to confiscate our passports. I saw a big file on us. They left the room, left a file 2 inches thick on the table. I opened it and thought, oh my God, it's about us, I said to the girlfriend, later the wife. And went back to our house. We were kind of under a 24-hour police guard, which in India is iffy at the best of times. And one day we decided we have to get out of here. We have no passports. We don't know what's going to happen next. Yeah, maybe we'll be extradited to Canada. And we put our luggage outside one evening, arranged with the taxi to pick us up at midnight, and eluded the police, got to the culvert, got in the taxi, moved 100 kilometers to Anjuna Beach, and never saw the police again for another 4 years.
So what did you do after you spent your 4.5 years in Canada? What did you do then?
Well, I had to find a job, obviously, and I found a job. The first job I was offered was selling vacuum cleaners, and I kind of, well, I don't know, it's on commission. I said, well, what do you have to lose? You've never done it before. So the first 2 weeks, I didn't sell any. You go out on appointments. It's a $1,300 vacuum. It was in the 80s. And you go on preset appointments, and if you sell one at the suggested price, you make $300 or $400. First 2 weeks, didn't sell any. I was calling in from a customer's house, and the owner says, come on in the office when you're finished, will you? And I thought, oh, they're going to fire me. I went in, and he said, we'd like you to be our personnel manager. And I said, I haven't sold anything. He said, you come to work on time every day. He says, you're well-dressed, you're professional, and you're a good speaker. So I went on to actually be one of the top salesmen in Canada for the Kirby Vacuum Company for more than 4 years. Earning commissions of $1,000, $2,000, and $3,000 a week, and hiring and training other salespeople to do the same.
Well, so you turned it around and ended up becoming a salesman.
I went back to school at 40 just for my own pleasure because I hadn't received a certificate. I dropped out to travel. I took international trade. I started going to Mexico before I graduated, bringing back jewelry. The college said, sure, you can sell it in the lobby. It goes with the international trade program that we promote. And from there, I ran a successful silver jewelry business in Canada for 10 years, and then continued that business in Mexico for 10 years.
Like, when you look back at your time involved with, hashish and heroin, when you look back at it now, how do you feel about it now, being in your 70s now, and looking back as a young man 50 years ago in the 70s when you were doing it? How do you feel about it now?
Well, I don't regret it. I'm very thankful that I was able to have all the experiences that I did, including going to jail, as much as one can. Maybe it was foolish. I did it, so that was meant to happen for me.
No regrets whatsoever.
No regrets whatsoever, and I don't recommend that people take drugs, especially young people. But again, we have to make our own decisions in life, and I've regretted maybe doing one or two things in my life. I think we all have, but praise yourself for what you have done, not for what you haven't done.
When was the last time you touched heroin?
In all honesty, about 8 years ago. I went to Vienna for a couple of lines. I used to get like a month, 2 months vacation. But I have something like that very well under control. I can do it and say goodbye. And it's just like, this is how it was.
And are you a single man? Are you married? Or?
No, I've been married for, we celebrated our 6th anniversary last week on the 22nd. And I've been with Pani, or Nina, for 7 years now, and very happy. And she's a wonderful Thai lady. She was a factory worker, mind you, before I met her. But when I met this lady, I knew that this was the lady that I was going to spend the rest of my life with, just like that. None of the others had done that for me.
And does she know about your past?
I'm a very honest person. My wife in Canada, who was involved in a lot of this, told me, "You're too honest for your own benefit." What does she think? Well, she's a Thai lady, so number one, I'm lucky that she's even with me, knowing that. She's very supportive of me now, and we don't really discuss it.
So tell us about your books. Where, if somebody, because you've written a book that I read before we did this interview, where is it, if people want to get your books, where can they get them?
Kindle, Amazon, under the name A. Clark, C-L-A-R-K.
And what books have you written?
Well, Living in Mexico was my first book, and Teaching in Thailand was my second book. Locked Up Abroad, my third. Arthur Road Prison, Mumbai, somewhere in there. Thai Friendly, My Life in the Kingdom. Thailand, Once in a Lifetime. I've actually had to make a list. I think that's probably good enough, a good enough list. And A Canadian in Thailand.
And they can all be found on Amazon.
Amazon Kindle. Yeah, they're all reasonably priced, and most of them are all on Kindle. There may be one that's only on hardcover there.
Perfect. Well, I'll leave the links in the description for that. And look, Alex, thanks very much for coming on here and sharing your story. It takes, I suppose, a brave person to come out with a story like you've told. You've told it. You said you have no regrets. You stand by everything you said, So I do admire you for having the courage to come on and do this interview.
Well, I'll be honest, Pete, I was a little nervous, and you've really had me going all week. And even my wife says you're excited, too excited. And you've kind of made me relive my life over the past week, preparing to meet you and to have this interview.
Well, look, man, take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
I'm going to check out more of your books. I'll have a read up to the Canadian and Thailand. Sounds an interesting one.
Continued success. Your videos are fantastic. This is one of the reasons I follow you and that I got in touch with you. I really respect what you do, and I know it's not an easy job. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Perfect. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.